Robert and Kate, or Doom and Gloom, are going to go through the state of the finances, so I'll turn it over to them.
Should we kill the lights so that everybody can... Thank you, Christine. So as you all know, we offered up an opportunity for employees to come to some informational meetings on the riveting budget process that we've got and where we stand with the city's budget. We had 2 such meetings, and the first was fairly well attended, and the second, not so much. So we decided that if you weren't going to come, we would just force feed you. So essentially what we want to do today is present you some information on the budget so that you have an understanding of some of the issues that we are dealing with internally, some of the structural provisions we want to put in place before we move forward into a situation where everybody's like, hey, how do we get back to how we were? And of course you've heard us all say that we're at the new normal. The way that we structured the meetings was that Robert and I were sitting in front of everybody or having a conversation with the employees in the council chamber. So that's why we're just going to sit and chat with you instead of standing up here and presenting to you or barking at you. We want to make it more conversational. So I'm going to go through a series, and Robert too, we're going to go through a series of slides that we've got up here to provide you with some initial information. Then we'll open it up for questions so that we can go back to a slide should you have a particular question. But don't think that we're trying to rush through this. We're trying to get to the point where you can sort of engage with us on the questions that you have or information that you would like in addition to perhaps what's presented up here. Warning, it may get a little depressing, so don't operate heavy equipment after this things like that. So.
And this is part of what we thought would be a series, so feedback from you would be good. We're going to do one, hopefully, if everyone wants us to continue, on our medical insurance, particularly with what's going on with the Affordable Care Act. We've had some questions on what the impact that's going to be and how that's going to impact us. We talked about another question we had for a future one was PERS. We're going to have Public Employees Retirement System has a presentation that they come, and they haven't been to the city in a number of years, so we're going to ask them to come back, and it's kind of a nice 101 that goes over PERS and how it works and how it pertains to you. So those are the ones we kind of had identified as future ones, but we really want feedback from you. Are those kind of the topics you want? What other topics do you want employee information sessions on? We need you to tell us what you're looking for. Those are some of the areas that we had gotten a lot of questions on, and we felt we could see that there was a need for some of that information out there. So this is kind of our trial run, so kind of be nice to us.
Don't be nice.
Come on.
Don't be nice.
We can't heckle?
No, I cry easily, so. And Kate wanted everyone in the back to stand up, and I said, no, that's not nice.
Well, if we're sitting, it's only fair that you should be standing. So,
Yeah.
Okay. And then this is information that the City Council was presented, obviously, as part of the budget process. The numbers have been obviously taken from their direction and then formulated into what you see here, which is going to lead into the final document. So, without further ado, what I first wanted to do is walk everybody through kind of the process so you can visually see how the budget cycle works and how it ties in with some other areas that we deal with in the fiscal realm of things. And so up here I created a little bit of a flow chart to show you how we kick off the budget process with the strategic planning session with the City Council. Now this last go around was a little bit different. We had a large constituency of new council members that we had to sort of lead through this process and explain. We used that opportunity to have them set forward what became then the Think We Know process, where council put forth their priorities for the foreseeable future to guide us through the fiscal process, through our daily operational processes, sort of set us on the path of where we want to go as an organization. So that is the process, the first box that you see up there. The ownership level is that blue color that's in the background, to sort of show you where this process is for, or the representing agency or organization structure behind it. So the City Council and City Manager are heavily involved. Obviously, OMB is threaded throughout this whole thing, but we have the council set forth that direction. So we sort of use that to lead into the budget building process. So in the middle, you see that in spring we jump into the actual budget development. We have a series meet with departments and ask you what you need, and given what resources we have, try to be accommodating for a little bit rough last couple of years, but that will certainly evolve. And then of course the budget is due to taxation by the end of June. And then we morph into sort of the follow-up process from the previous year, which is where we have the auditors come into the finance department to look over what was expended during the previous year. It's some of that external fiscal review process that we use, and I put in there sort of where we are today in the budget process, and then lucky for all of us, as far as job security, the cycle just repeats itself over and over and over, like Groundhog Day.
And the most important part is that finance department part.
Truly up for debate. As you all recall, and I will spare you going through them again, but these are the priorities that the council has set forth for the organization until the foreseeable future. Sort of a different approach this year is that they're not annual priorities. We're starting to restructure the way that we strategically think about the direction we're headed by saying that the priorities sort of live on until they're changed, so that we are not bracing for what the next set of priorities is going to be in short order. So for now, we're all marching to the same drummer, and this is it. With that being said, the resource plan that's built around the budget, or around the priorities rather, is what we call the budget, obviously. I'm not going to jump into, this presentation was a little longer than we thought last time, so I'm not going to jump into what all the different types of funds are and so forth, but rather focus on what matters to all of you and to our daily operations for the most part, sorry, sewer folks, but it's the general fund. And that's where you hear us say, we've got $157 million budget, where truly our budget is a lot larger than that when you consider all the other operational pieces that we have. It breaks down in the general fund into the departments. I put this up here so you can sort of see relative to one another, how robust truly civil services, and that we really need to get them under control. But you can see that we've got a couple departments that are larger than others. Obviously, they're very heavily focused around public safety, as we should be, and those are expensive departments to run. But this is just to sort of show you how everybody shakes out. A lot of times we are particularly interested in our departments and don't really look outside of all of our departments. This is just a quick snapshot to show you that. And how the money comes into the budget, or how we are funded as an organization in the city, is what I'd like to reflect in a series of slides that are coming up here. So the revenues. I show it to you as a pie chart so you can see the whole pie and you can see what makes up the pieces or the larger portions of our revenue sources. And obviously, for those of us that have paid really any attention to this, it's primarily property tax and sales tax, or ad valorem, which is property tax, and C-tax, which is sales tax. And I'll jump into those a little bit more detail, but those are a large majority of the revenues that come in. So obviously, when those things are impacted, it happens, and we just lived through that process for the last few years. So going a little bit more depth into ad valorem or property tax, sort of give you an idea of where we're trending in this fiscal year, is we're looking to be relatively flat. I think it was, 0.25% down. So we're still not climbing yet, and there are a lot of reasons for that, but we think that less than 1%, we're just going to call it flat, call it what it is. Hopefully we will be surprised. But we get those numbers from the assessor, so we don't really have a lot of control of what those numbers will be. So we look to, unless you guys got buy what you're building a bunch of houses, but we look to that source for the information that we get to put in the budget on what those revenues are anticipated to be.
And on ad valorem, you may have read in the paper about Harrah's appealing their tax rate. That is one of the impacts that really does hurt us in big numbers. Your house at a couple $100,000 is a smaller impact than Harrah's at several $1 million, and that does have a direct impact on our bottom line. The other thing to remember is the legislature a number of years ago passed legislation that said property tax can decline quickly, but it can only go up 3% for personal property tax and 8% for commercial, and that's also tied to CPI. So that's under the best scenarios we could look for is a 3% increase in property tax. So the danger is that it goes down quickly, but it doesn't go back up the same rate. So that's one of the concerns we have going forward.
So consolidated tax, or C-tax, which is largely what we consider to be sales tax, is one of those things that's made up of a very, and very good at explaining what this is, too, for that matter. It's made up of a variety of various taxes. We joke, one of them is we've got a cigarette tax, a liquor tax, the BCCRT, the SCCRT, there's various components, but we come to find out, which is why we've changed our habits at home, that the liquor tax is really not beer and wine, so you've got to drink the hard stuff if you're really good at it. There's my call to all of you. You can do something about our taxes. It's called all whiskey all the time. So C-tax, you can see the trend that's occurring over time and where sort of the bottom fell out. And you can see, because we've heard and we are giving you the numbers, that we're starting to recover in this area. And that feels great and that feels good. And so ride on that feeling for a little while until we jump into some of these other slides. But yes, we are recovering as a region, and yes, we are seeing increases in people's comfort level around spending of this nature. Go out by your car this weekend, please, if you can, so that we can see further increases in this area. But C-tax was changed back in the 1980s, I think it was.
It was really an implementation in '81 of a tax shift in the state of Nevada, away from property tax more to sales tax for local government. Any of you that were around during that time, it was a fear of the Prop 13 coming over from California. Of course, I'd argue I'd rather have Prop 13 than what they gave us. So they redistributed the sales tax. And so technically, the sales tax that Reno gets, or the C-tax, which sales tax became C-tax, is based on what we were receiving in property tax back in 1980 that they redistributed. So of the sales tax that is generated in Washoe County here, because that C-tax, there's several layers, and we could spend hours on it, so I'm going to really quickly talk through this. So if you really want to know about it, I got binders and binders, and I can go into detail, but it's distributed to the counties, and then it's distributed within the county. So like within Washoe County, we end up with about 29% of the C-tax. Because basically back in 1980, it was built on that sales tax distribution. So Washoe County gets the largest share of it, of course, but there's also everybody from the Bird Eye TV district to Truckee Meadows Fire to Sparks to Reno that get a share of that distribution. We end up with 29%.
Though we like to argue that we generate a lot more than that for the county, especially being the urban center.
We generate about 75% and have over 50% of the population, and yet we only get 29%.
But we're not there. What we're projecting for the next fiscal year is an increase over the fiscal year that we just saw of about 2.5%. It's a conservative number because we base our budget on it, right? The last thing we want to do is say, yeah, it's going to increase 10%. Let's keep our fingers crossed, and then have it not, so we build a budget around that, and then have that not come to fruition, and then we're looking for further places to cut. So it's one of those areas you will see me be conservative, where it was. But for that matter, what we're doing is looking at it every month when we get those numbers in and adjusting as necessary. We did it all during last fiscal year. We had every month but one, which happened to be our largest month, of increases in C-tax in fiscal 13. So that's a very good sign. But every month we call up our cohorts. We have a structure that the city manager has put into place where we talk to other sectors, industry sectors throughout the area. Everyone from real estate, automotive, gaming, airport, you name it. We chat with them quarterly to say, hey, what are you seeing as far as trends or anomalies that may potentially impact C-tax, so that we can better project what our revenues will be, so that we can more accurately reflect that in our budget. And so that's the C-tax process. So
and I was just going to say, Washoe County Sparks, basically, when they did their budgets, they were 2.5% also, I believe.
county was more.
They were 3, yeah.
So, it's a matter of sort of giving it your, looking at as much information as you can, and so your most educated guess at where you think it's going to land, and adjust as you look at it. So that's the practice that we've got in place for C-tax. So that was sort of an overview of the revenues that we have coming in to the organization. I want to just show you a picture really quickly of where those revenues are expended within the budget cycle. And what you can largely see here in the blue green slices of the pie is all of us sitting in this room and our coworkers. We expend a lot of resources around individuals, which really, we are part of the organization, we provide the services. but we don't come cheap. So when you go through a process like we just did, where we had a large shortfall based on a lot of things that were occurring, we don't have those other slices of the pie really to toy with. If we're looking at the situation which we did, which we were committed to you to not further reduce staff. So for us to say, okay, we're not going to reduce staff levels any further, we're to the bone. It really leaves us with those other slices of the pie, services and supplies, stabilization, ending fund balance. Those are really things that we have our hands tied on as far as what we can do to go below a required level by the state. So again, you saw us put in place things like, well, we're going to have to freeze fleet purchases from fiscal 14, or we're going to have to start dipping into some of our programs and making reductions in things, parts or other things. We're looking under every rock to figure out where we can touch to try to fill in some of the hole or the gap between what we're bringing in revenues and what we're putting out the door in expenditures. And so this graphic is to show you that we just don't have a lot of wiggle room in that regard. So when and if things get really bad again, we've got to put in place a mechanism so that we don't touch those little green slices. Is really the message that you'll get over the next few slides. So with that in mind, we want to talk about some of the big issues that we've got out there, not to scare you, but just to make you aware that we are trying our hardest to put in place those mechanisms and protections so that when we hit the next economic downturn, we're ready, and we've got some of those provisions in place so that we can absorb some of that. With that said, we've got some pretty significant hurdles to overcome in the process.
Other post-employment benefits, often referred to as OPEB, it's retiree medical for the city of Reno, and for other areas. And this has come to light, particularly with what happened in Detroit. We're getting a lot of questions coming up. It's similar to what happened in Stockton. We're in a little different situation than they are, but we're very similar to cities and counties throughout the country. So what I'm talking about here is nothing like we're unique compared to Miami or anywhere else. Stockton and Detroit had their own retirement system. We are with the state retirement system, which helps us in a lot of ways because they've done a better job of funding. We, the city, however, have taken on retiree medical on ourselves. And retiree medical for us is medical, dental, vision, and that's what you get when you retire, depending on your bargaining contract, what you get when you retire. There is this unfunded actuarial accrued liability that says we have this liability out there saying, you worked here 30 years, we're going to have to pay for you for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it may be. In addition, we have a current year accrual, which is what we call the normal cost, sometimes the current expenses of people that have retired now. And that comes out to the annual required contribution, which is about $17 million for the city of Reno right now. We're putting nothing aside for it. Next slide. The total current unfunded liability is about $210 million. Well, that was as of last year. We do an actuarial each year, and we haven't gotten an actuarial this year, but it probably won't change much. It actually went down. Unfortunately, the reason it went down is we lost employees when we downsized. So the actuarial numbers decreased. But we have about $210 million of unfunded liability. And that is projected to continue to grow as medical costs increase. And that's something we need to really take a handle on so we don't end up like others. A lot of things that are coming outside our control are pushing us too. Moody's and Standard & Poor's are starting to look at not only the OPEB liabilities, but our PERS liability. They're looking at what our share of PERS's unfunded liability is and saying you need to be booking your share of that unfunded liability. And it's not just Reno, as I'm saying this, it's everybody in the country that they're looking at doing this for, so they're not just picking on us. GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, is saying you need to do more to be booking these liabilities. They started requiring cities and counties to start booking their OPEB liability in 2006. the next step is starting to actually coming up with funding plans. So you're going to be hearing more and more of this discussion, not just because of us, but because it's going on throughout the country. It's an issue that everyone in the country is facing. We are working right now to set up a trust, because one of the first things you need to do is have a trust that is and when we say a trust, you don't want to just put the money aside in another account that somebody in the future can take. You set up a trust that is protected, similar to the public employees retirement system. So that's one of the things we're working on doing right now, to set up a trust to set that up. And since we talked about $210 million of unfunded liabilities, another one of my favorite topics that I like to talk about is our debt portfolio. As of June 30th, we have about $580 million of outstanding debt that is owed, whether it's in revenue bonds, which is the largest section, or general obligation bonds, and then the RDA. You add all that together, that's about $580 million worth of debt outstanding, about $40 million a year in bond payments. Most of that is in the form of revenue bonds. Revenue bonds are where we have a dedicated source of revenue that is pledged to those revenues. General obligation bonds are kind of where we have the full faith and credit of the city behind those bonds. But even under those general obligation bonds in the state of Nevada, we have kind of a unique law. I say that often when we talk about Nevada law, but we have a unique law that allows for what we call a GO-Rev bond, where we can pledge revenue and it's backed with a general obligation, so we get a better interest rate, but it is technically a revenue bond. And an example of a revenue bond is the retract bonds everyone has been reading about and probably talking about. There's a 1/8% countywide sales tax that is pledged to those bonds, and it's specific to those bonds and those bonds only. Those bonds have no other pledge other than that 1/8% sales tax. So when, you'll hear people say, well, let them come and take the trench away. No, they don't come and take the trench away. They take the 1/8% sales tax, and that's what they get. And so that's what's been pledged to them until their bond or their debt is paid off.
People are so riveted by this bond talk that they're
Leaving. Okay, well, if anyone wants to talk about bonds, it is an exciting and interesting topic, contrary to what some people may think. So
But what it means to you is that it's a significant liability for us. A lot of our revenues are pledged in the budget cycle every year, are dedicated to these obligations that we signed up for in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, if it were a credit card, we're maxing out our credit cards, right?
Right. Payday loans.
We're on payday loans. But again, we're putting this in here to show you some of the big issues or pieces that we're grappling with as we sort of put our budget forward.
And we are taking, in fact, we look through our portfolio at all times, see what we can do to make things better. We just refinanced a couple of the bonds because we had interest savings. Interest rates they kind of come back up at a historical low. So we took advantage of that for one of our street bonds and the downtown event center bonds to try to get better interest savings, restructure our portfolio. We didn't, change what we were pledging, but what we did was we tried to get interest savings, which in essence saves us money, which gives us savings for the budget. Next year it's about $1 million in savings for the general fund.
Which we need to put in OPEB or reserve.
Yeah, well, it's in the budget already, unfortunately. But it is savings that we didn't have to cut because we were able to have those savings. So we do look at our bond portfolio, we look at what we can do at all times to try to maximize it and to do what's best. So.
And we're not bonding, really. I have no plans to.
No.
Okay.
And this, I really want to highlight this particularly because we're at that time of year. There's two things going on when we talk. We've been talking budget. And Kate says, oh, we have a $158 million budget for this fiscal year. Civil service had that huge, $250,000 budget for this year.
Yeah, no,
They're breaking our back. But, yeah. But that doesn't mean we can spend it all. We don't have the cash yet, because that budget is built on the revenues coming in. And the problem is we have this period of time when, you know, property tax, which is, you remember, is about a third of what we get coming in. We don't get any property tax until September 1st. So we have this, we call it this drought period, where we're not getting much revenue in. And our sales tax, C-tax, is about 2 months behind. So we're not going to get sales tax or C-tax for July until the end of September. So we're in the drought years.
So I don't
Or
know
drought
pointer,
years.
but where we are on this, and it's tough to read, is do you see where the blue, which is our actual cash, the money we have in the bank, that's our actual cash balance, where it touches, does not go low, that's breaking the law, where it touches the line is right about where we are now. You know, it's us barely making payroll at this point as far as cash in the bank. And
Yeah.
so when we say to you the difference between budget authority and cash in the bank means please don't go out at the beginning of the fiscal year and start buying a bunch of stuff. You know that we're getting new computers. Well, the reason they're not sitting on your desk July 2nd is for this very reason, because we have the budget authority. Just like, you know, if you make $50,000 a year as your salary, you don't go out on, you know, January 1 and spend $50,000 on a car. You don't have that money in the bank yet. You get it in increments throughout the year. That's the same with how we receive the revenue. So what we're showing you here, though, is the reason that the blue is where it is because we've been, you know, thrown a bone by the cosmic gods of having that RTC money in the bank for the Southeast Connector project. Without that cash in the bank, take away the blue from this graph, and you would see the situation that we would be in. And this ties directly
We would be at the red.
Right, the red is us without that, you know, one-time sort of special revenue that we received in the bank. Going below the line, what's going below the line mean, Robert?
That means Robert goes to jail.
Robert and I are in orange.
And I don't look good in orange, and I really don't do good sharing Excel.
So, you know, you can't go negative cash. It's something you can't do without, you know, running risk of being taken over by the state. We aren't able to claim bankruptcy here in Nevada. So this ties directly into the fact that when we do see increases in revenues, we absolutely have to put them towards reserve levels so that we aren't in the situation, in the red situation.
And more importantly, especially because we're in that drought period now, we have gotten it, that we do have that $7.5 million. And what's interesting, if you look at last year, if you see, you know, the humps, the blue humps were higher than the blue humps are now. Our cash balance on average this year is $1.5 million less than it was last year. So we're in even greater danger when we get to August 30th of, you know, that's some aggressive cash management, as I call it, get us as close as aggressive cash management. You get as close to zero without going under. This year we have also asked for an advance on our property tax from the county, which we received, so we're in decent shape. But if you can hold off on anything during our July, August drought years, is really the months, is what I really would like you to hold off, because we have that, because of this. So there is something beyond budget, it's cash, and you know, so if you can hold off, I know if you got police cars or fire trucks, as remember we talked about buying diesel, it's like, I know you gotta buy diesel to run your fire trucks, but if there's something you can hold off, and that's why the computers are being held off until September.
So what we'd like you to do is take this message to the degree that you feel comfortable and pass it, you know, to your staff members so that they also understand why you're telling them they can't order student loans. So, you know, it's not we're trying to be curmudgeon, it's the fact that we have, you know, it's a cash flow issue.
Yeah. So that's it.
Okay, so now that we're all feeling good, let's go over some of the issues that we have and sort of what we're doing to make this organization stronger and more strategic in the future, so that you feel better about, you know, what is behind your fiscal staff or your fiscal backbone, if you will. You know, just know that what we're doing is our primary focus is to try to strengthen that. We've got those unfunded liabilities that we talked about. First and foremost for us is that reserve level, which has been sitting how much or what percentage of those revenues go into the reserves versus go to fund OPEB versus go to,
And that 8.3 would get us to where that blue line was permanently.
right, so blue is 8.3, just about.
Yeah.
But it gets us out of the red. OPEB, other post-employment benefits, you heard us talk about that. The interesting thing to me is we never used to talk about OPEB. It's a real liability. I guess we just, every other jurisdiction did this too, is just sort of swept it under the rug. Yeah, it's out in the future, it's out in the future. But, the fact of the matter is all of us sitting in this room, for the most part, that's our future. That's our future retiree health plan.
And right now, we're spending about $4.5 million a year on it. So, and that's pay as you go.
Yeah,
So that's
so we're paying as you go. It's sort of just dependent on, it's not something you can truly plan for. It sort of depends on where it falls out. But, and then of course, for those folks in the room that are going, okay, you've got all these things that are in line for to start fixing or putting more money towards roads or street sweepers or roofs. What do we put money towards roofs? But yeah, we've got some things that we have not touched for a number of years because the budget has been so bad that are going to need repair. And we don't have, that I'm aware of, unless Mark's got some money stashed somewhere, a reserve or a capital improvement plan that adequately addresses the needs that we're going to have for our facilities and our infrastructure. That's another living issue out there that we're acutely aware of. But are we funding it right now? Not necessarily. So we've got a lot of things that we really have to get in order before we can start, really feeling good about where we are as far as, fiscal stability. But we are planning. We are working on this every single day, and that's what we do when we're not putting out other fires. So if you come to us and we continue to tell you no on things, please understand why and what's in line for it. And so with that, I guess I just want to open it up to have that dialogue or discussion on maybe some of the questions you have or ideas you have. We're open to that too. Being innovative, accountable, and effective is something that we strive to seek from every one of you, and we've seen it and want to continue to see those traits. So if you've got suggestions for how to further make your area of the organization more efficient so that we can drive towards those goals, please share that with us. The payroll system, as much of a pain in the rear as it's been, is one of those things that's put into place to reduce our need to interact with human beings every day on questions around benefits or, filling out and pushing around pieces of paper. We're putting in your hands the ability for you to sort of be responsible for your own time and benefit management versus sort of, overtaxing the HR staff. So we're sort of moving in that direction and trying to continue to move in the direction where we do more with less. We are living under this new normal. So we're all ears if you've got further suggestions on how we can get there. Questions? Comments?
Okay, can you go to the the CTAC slide?
Yep.
And I want to talk for a minute about buy local
Oh, yes.
and what little things we can do, not necessarily as employees, but as citizens, and what we can tell our neighbors that they can do to help our community recover. And that's buy local. Kate said, everybody go out and buy a car. Well, do it in Washington County, please. And look, I get that everybody has to make decisions for their family and around their family's budget, and sometimes, it means buying something on the internet because you're going to be able to get it a lot cheaper and there's free shipping and you're not going to pay sales tax. But where you can, weigh those decisions with making the decision to spend your money with a business in this community. And ideally that's a small proprietor, locally owned business, but even shopping at the Target in Reno, not the Target in Sparks, don't shop at Target in Sparks, that money doesn't come to us, but doesn't go to Sparks, goes to the developers out of wherever they are. But it really does, every little bit that we do as residents to spend our money in our own community gets those bars back up to where we were. And it's, I think it's something that I've had to change my habits. you know, and I'm not saying, hey, don't go have a fun weekend in San Francisco or whatever, but while you're there, don't shop at the Gap, because we've got a Gap here. If you're going to shop at the Gap, do it here. You know, if you're going out of town, shopping local businesses there, but when you're at home, spend your money at home, because it does make a big difference. And the more we can share that message with our community and our neighbors and help them understand how that benefits us, the better.
Chief?
Okay, Robert, I think Robert had mentioned that of the C-tax collection, we get 27%.
29 about.
About
29. Now, is that state law or is that just Washington County?
So through the process of putting together who gets allocated what, the state legislature in their infinite wisdom had put together a formula, and it's more complex than, you know, decoding the.
But it is essentially
state law.
Yeah.
Right?
So they determine what percentage we get of that formula. Yeah.
Have we ever protested? Over and over and
Oh,
over
yeah.
again. And
What was the
it's
question?
Have we ever protested?
and I can talk a little bit to that. There was actually a bill this last session that made some adjustments to the what they call the C-tax distribution formula. And those changes should benefit us. It won't be huge benefits to us, but what it will do is provide some stability. As Robert said, the amount, what's called our base amount, the amount that we know we're going to get every year, assuming the economy's at least producing what it produced in 1997. We know that we're going to get that much. And then everything across the state, every entity, there's 172 entities in the state that get C-tax. Every one of them is essentially guaranteed a base amount that's based on what they were receiving in 1997. And what they were receiving in 1997 goes back to what they were getting in property tax in 1981. So it's really stupidly complicated. But then every year, everything that was generated above that base amount within the counties was what was called excess, which makes it sound like it's extra, but it's really what's the increment above the base. That's distributed according to another formula that has to do with how much your property is growing, how much your population is growing, what the value of what your assessed value is doing as far as growth. And there's another factor in there that's a small factor that I'm not thinking of right now. And so every year you sort of reset back to that same base from 1997. And what this change that went through this last session does is says, okay, you're going to grow, that excess amount is essentially recognizing your growth in that year. So if you've gained population, if you've added new homes, that you no longer go back and reset to 1997 every year. Once you've created the growth, you keep it. So your base will now be every year going forward what you got the prior year. So that we're not continually competing against Washington County or Sparks to see, can we get 6 more babies born so that we can be the ones that go out in front of the population growth. So that will provide us some pretty significant stability. And that's part of what, yes, there was a big contraction in the economy where you see those bars drop, but part of that was that funky thing with the distribution where we were growing, and then everybody went flat. We all went back to the 1997 base, and the excess kind of got evenly distributed, so you have these wild swings. An example in Clark County is in fiscal year 12, the city of Mesquite was the only C-tax entity in Clark County that was growing. And they were going to get like $162 million more in C-tax than they ever had before. And none of the other Clark County, Las Vegas weren't going to get any extra because of the way that funky excess distribution worked. And so that change got made. We've all been told, we're not looking at it again for another 10 years. There is another kind of outside thing going on with C-tax right now. The city of Fernley is suing the state of Nevada, saying that distribution formula that the base distribution formula and the way that the excess revenues are distributed is unconstitutional. If they, and they're in their discovery, it's at the Supreme Court. They're in their discovery phase right now. If they are successful in winning that suit against the state, it will likely result in a radical change to the way that state set distribution formula works. In all likelihood, that will benefit us. To Robert's point, that we generate about 75% of the revenue that's generated in Washoe County is generated within the city limits. Fernley's argument is that if you're generating it, you're also probably providing the services that are required to generate that revenue. And so if they're successful in that, we'll probably end up in a special legislative session to reset that and see how that affects local government. So it's pretty complex, but I'll give you one more time, my local.
I have two questions. Robert, what are the range of terms of the bonds that we have?
Right now, they're anywhere from a couple years out to 2052.
Okay.
So we have bonds out there for basically another 40 years.
And looking at the timeline over those, are the majority of them in the next 15 years? Or?
Probably in the next 20 years. A lot, to give you an example, in about 2001, the bond debt for the city was about $50 million. So most of the bonding we have undertaken has been from 2001 on. So, and most of the bonds were 20 to 30 year bonds. So what you're going to see is, 20 to 30 years bonds from the last, about 10 years. So we're looking at 10 to 20 years where most of the bonds will go out. The longer term ones are the retract bonds, and so those go out to 2052.
Okay. I have a couple other questions. Looking at the C-tax, the ad valorem, which is the majority of where we obviously get our revenue, and what Cadence said as well as far as the change of the formulation, without looking at the numbers in detail, it does not look like we can grow our way out of this to get that additional 4%, from 4 to 8% in contingency or reserves to take care of the increase in what we need as far as inflation for benefits, health insurance, all of that. The growth of this community, what we've seen so far, is not going to be able to take care of that.
Not in 1 year. It's going to be over time.
Over 10 years.
I mean, it depends so much on what our expenditures are or on things that we're not able to continue. You know what I mean? That gap between expenditures and revenues, whichever way it flips, is what we need to focus on dedicating towards various areas of responsibility.
And that's my point. I hear about, let's grow our way out of this, and it's not going to happen in 2 years. It'll help, but not going to happen in 2 years.
Trying to solve it.
You're right, because the ad valorem, which is a huge chunk, is capped at about, to be honest, about 3%.
Right.
Commercial, but that's not new revitalization. And
right.
Really, the only way we're going to grow out of it is for the economy to make a turnaround.
Right.
Read what happened, that Harrah's and Caesars is arguing about Harrah's, and it makes doom and gloom here look, optimistic. But what we need to do is, buy local, encourage our economy. It's every little thing we do, we need to help our economy. And are we going to grow out of it in a year or two? Probably not. It's gonna take us a while to grow out. There is not going to be the recovery of the recessions we've had in the past. This is a different recession. It took us about 10 years to get into what happened with the financial markets during what I call the free money years. And we're having to build ourselves out of that, and not just Reno, but the entire country and the entire world. So it's gonna take a while for the economy to grow out. We're not gonna see the booms like we have seen that coming out of the other recessions, because that recession was so dramatic that it's a different type of economy than we used to have.
Especially with the caps at 3% and 8%.
Yeah.
You know, you're just,
We're handcuffed.
we're handcuffed. I mean,
And as
that's-
long as we control expenditures as well.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? As we grow in revenues, if those expenditure increases are, you know, outpacing the growth of the revenue, I mean, we have to try to, you know, when we have a new position, people, you know, we're recommending bring them in at the lowest possible salary range so that we, you know, we can get effective people, but at the same time, we're constantly controlling expenditures.
Yeah, and I think to Julie's question, I mean, I think that's a point that everybody needs to sort of take with them, is that, you know, two sides of the equation are the revenues and the spending. And to Julie's question, to your point, you're not going to solve the long-term budget problems of the city just on the revenue side. We have to continue to find ways, and I know every department, you know, because I mean, I'm going out and visiting employees and talking to them, and I know every department is hurting. You know, we need more staff, we need more equipment, we need more resources. But we as an organization have to continue to work on that expenditure side of the ledger as well, and find innovative ways to do things. You know, how can we be more efficient with the resources that we have, or even you know, reduce costs within the resources we have, and that means changing the way that we do business sometimes. So to Julie's point, I think it's very, very well, you know, a great question is that we have to continue to focus on that expenditure side, because we are not going to grow out of this you know, this budget situation that we're in. We're going to have to continue to look at both sides of the equations.